is it relevant in 2025?
The assault that we are facing, not only on truth, but on people who are marginalized in this country. We need to have a space where we can teach people about the history of this country. We can historicize what is happening today so that we can empower them. One of the things that we've taken to saying lately is knowledge is resistance. Now, that is something that shouldn't be as true and as powerful as it is today. But one of the things that historically, for instance, a fascist regime has sought to do is to quell knowledge, is to knock out the intellectuals. Because if you can remove knowledge from people, you can control them. And so right now, if we can make sure that people are equipped with the correct history, if we can make sure that we are teaching them what the schools don't want them to learn right now, about slavery, about Jim Crow, about the dispossession of land for indigenous people, then we can empower them and catalyze them to do the work today to create a just and inclusive democracy.
You know, here I am, a 17-year-old kid confronting the state, power, position, authority. We go down to confront the state troopers. Like I said, I'm number 3 and 1.
Everyone is looking for ways to resist right now. Sometimes the learning piece is just for the understanding the world that I'm in right now. But what you are saying to me is that learning things you're not supposed to learn, just being a part of the knowledge that they don't want people to have, is a part of resistance as well.
We offer lectures, we offer workshops, we have mini courses with scholars who otherwise would be inaccessible to them, like Dr. Eric Foner or Nicole Hannah-Jones or Dr. Hassan Jeffries.
If we don't know what has come before, we can easily slip up and create something worse. I think we're in one of these moments right now.
Most of what we offer is free. We offer learning tours through the South. We have programming for people of all generations. And so we want to make sure there are no financial barriers to that. So come for a course, come for a conversation to understand your power and how you can use history to catalyze you to action.
Can you talk about how they are using the word DEI?
Yeah.
That has little to nothing to do with the original definition of it.
Yes. So DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, those kinds of programs and initiatives primarily have helped make sure that white women, who are qualified and often more qualified than their white male counterparts, get an opportunity to compete. But what the right has done is conflated DEI with Black. And when you can do that, you can demonize an otherwise historically already demonized group and turn everybody against it. The reality of DEI is that most candidates from DEI who are Black or disabled or brown or women are more qualified. They have to be more qualified to even be able to compete. And so the idea that they're less qualified and somehow got the job, that's just not how racism and misogyny has worked in this world.
I teach in a law school, so we teach critical race theory, period. Did critical race theory inform the lecture that I gave you this evening? Didn't have to. I just gave you a history lesson. I just laid out the history for you.
Every day there's something that is put out that is targeting individuals. And so our pushback is that knowledge. But we're not just going to teach you the information and then let you float and figure out what to do with it. We're going to give you avenues, pathways for change. You are interested in doing something? Common Power has these different options.
So while you teach this stuff, you're also taking a stand on behalf of truth in education that is eroding away today.
Right. So one of the executive orders that has been passed is that anybody who is a K through 12 educator who teaches a quote unquote divisive concept, that their school could lose public funding. Now, they categorize a divisive concept as anything that falls under the idea that one group was targeted by another because of their identity. They also say it's divisive if you say that any institutions in the country were built on racism. So what is that telling us? Let's not talk about systemic racism. We can't talk about slavery. We can't talk about Jim Crow. We can't talk about the disenfranchisement of women. Any teacher who does that runs the risk of being fired, of being penalized in their school of losing funding. So we step in to support those educators and those administrators in whatever way that we can. And one of the ways we've been able to do that is our Truth and Purpose Learning Tours for educators. We know teachers are underpaid in this country. So through the generous support of our donors, we are able to give those teachers scholarships. to take them on a history journey through Georgia and Alabama and learn this history. But more than that, it creates community for them. It creates a group of individuals who are like-minded, who after the learning tour, stay connected. We didn't know that that was going to be an outcome, and we help them stay connected. We offer monthly convenings for them to come together across cohorts. We make sure that any course that we offer that does cost money, they go to for free for life. Nothing else is required. But what we have found is that they come here and want to do the work. They learn about the history. They're inspired by the history makers who preceded them. They understand that if people before them could do that, they can do this. People are looking for a beacon right now because this is too hard to weather alone. And one of the things that Common Power generally, all of the things that we have in our orbit that we offer is the ability to give you guidance, to give you ideas of what you can do to help change the world.
Thanks, Dr. Scott. It's nice for her to join us tonight. So in that brief video, you learned a little bit about what the Institute is and our work with educators. And tonight is really all about educators. And without further delay, we want to send it to our first educator who's come to join us this evening. So very, very, very quickly, my name is Luke Michener, and I'm on the Institute for Common Power Educators for Democracy team, along with Carmen Cruz and Ivory Kennedy Jr. Joining me as co-host this evening. So you'll hear more from them throughout the evening as well. But we are 3 educators. I am just outside of Seattle. Carmen is in New York and Ivory is in Ohio. And we work together to do educator-related programming for the Institute. And so we put this evening together and are thrilled to have 5 of our educator ambassadors with us to share some of their learning with you, some of what they teach in their classroom, some of their approach in the classroom, just as a way for us to continue that pushing resistance, pushing knowledge forward in the context of a time where that can feel really challenging. So we want to send it over to our first speaker this evening. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Ms. Clark can get ready to share hers. In fact, I need to make sure I let go of the sound so that I think she'll need it as well. Sorry, just a second. Okay, Ms. Clark, you should be ready to go over there. This presentation will explore an innovative, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. I've got my document in front of me, but I've got it queued up to the wrong spot. I want to introduce Ms. Tamara Clark to you. Ms. Tamara Clark is an innovative educational technology leader, an Apple Distinguished Educator from Birmingham City Schools with nearly 2 decades of experience in technology integration. Born and raised in Joliet, Illinois, as the eldest of 6 children, she now raises 4 boys with her husband in Birmingham, Alabama. Currently serving as library media specialist and technology leader at Southampton K-8 school, Tamara has led her students to win prestigious competitions, including the ATEC Challenge and Samsung Solve for Tomorrow for the state of Alabama. She's recently featured in Business Alabama's Top 25 Women in Tech for Alabama and honored as a Miles College 50 Under 50 recipient. Tamara's pioneered the first Student Fellows pilot program through Ed Farm Partnership and specializes in innovative approaches to coding, education, and technology integration, and celebrates diverse perspectives and histories. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Tamara Clark, thanks for being with us tonight. Oh, you're muted there, Ms. Clark.
There we go. We got your sound. Yep, there you go.
Let me make sure. Is everyone see my screen? Can you see my screen? No. Okay.
No.
Go back and reshare.
There we go. You're back on mute though.
I don't know why it keeps taking me off of, let me see. That is so interesting.
I'm wondering if it's when you choose which window you're sharing, if that's what does it. Because now it just kicked you off of audio right now. So maybe try to play, yeah. Drop that down. Here, how about you try to share your presentation one more time? Try to share one more time, and then I'm gonna hit the ask to unmute and see if you can't get back to that once you start sharing your screen. We'll try it that way.
Okay, you can see my screen.
And I can hear you. Yep. And then hit present.
Okay.
Hit present. We're in business.
Can you hear me?
All right, take it away, Ms. Clark.
Right. Okay. I don't know why that was going on. But anyway, today's my lecture is pretty much on something that I was truly inspired by from the learning tour. I participated in a learning tour back in January, February for Alabama and Georgia, and it was truly life-saving, life-changing, and all of that good stuff. So this is a little bit about me. I'm really from Joliet, Illinois, but I've been in Birmingham for the past 22 years. Came down to attend college, Miles College, which is a HBCU, and never looked back. And once I became an ambassador, I really feel like I found my true purpose for working with those students, working in that K-8 sector. As you see, I'm from Joliet, Illinois, but I have been in Birmingham for nearly, like I said, 22 years. And for me, I always felt like it was a disconnect. I came down here with a certain expectation, with the civil rights movement, the civil rights capital. And I noticed, I didn't feel like I was just really getting that true experience of, the past of what really went on. But going through that learning tour, it really just kind of changed the game for me. And that is one of the reasons why. That's pretty much the main reason why I came back with a different game plan, a different mindset. So I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Charles Moulton, who walked with us, talked with us, told us his experience. Dr. Kerry Scott explained very well, just walking us through the historical context of Birmingham and Alabama. So when I came back, even thinking while I was on the trip, what can I do to get these students connected to their city? What can I do to get these students connected to the people that made history that's around? So with me having that tech background, I'm not your regular librarian. I'm more of a tech-based, STEM-based librarian. So I have the pleasure of teaching the students how to code apps. We build applications, we build websites, we have 3D printers, and we do have over 10,000 titles, 10,000 books in that space. So there's a plethora of resources in that space, but this journey that I'm on, that I experienced, I definitely wanted students to feel what I felt. So what I created was a program where students will code Birmingham's Black legacy. And I was able to feature this pretty much the last Wednesday in February, to culminate Black History Month. So when it comes to coding, what does that look like? What does this program look like that I initially wanted the students to integrate? We wanted to celebrate Black history through the lens of local heroes. I wanted the students to really research who are their monks in Birmingham City, whether they're living or deceased, but I wanted them to know who these legends are. I wanted to integrate coding with that historical context. And then the students, they're becoming historical storytellers. So we wanted student-centered voices, and I wanted to see how creative they can get with this. So all these people on this slide, they have some type of connection to Birmingham City. Of course, we have Mr. Charles Malden, who actually does not stay too far from the school. He's literally at the most 15 minutes from the school. I have Dr. Daisy Chandler, who is a local author. We have also to the left, we have Mr. Randall Woodfin, who's our mayor. We have a judge who has been so retired, Carol Smitherman. We have Dr. Michael Wesley, who's a pastor of a very, very prominent church, Greater Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. And these are just some of a handful of the few people that we researched, that our students researched and created apps on. So the instructional frameworks is definitely a project-based learning. Inside my space, I have about 5 monitors. I do have a very large library. I'm at a K-8 school with about 530 students, and my 7th and 8th graders, I focused on my 7th and 8th graders to work on this project. So it was a project-based learning, and the inquiry question was, how can we honor Birmingham's pioneers through digital storytelling? The tools that we used was Swift Playgrounds, that's created by Apple. Apple created a very, very kid-friendly way to make apps. We used a template, All About Me, and then a focus was research, storytelling, and design. So when it comes to app creation, as you can see on the slide to the right, this is what the students coded in order to create the app, okay? So this app was, of course, about Mr. Charles Malden. And the more lines the code, the more complex that app can be. So this was just pretty much a basic app. We had 4 pages of the app. You had a picture of their pioneer, a short biography about that person. The third page, which would consist of artifacts, video, or contributions that they made to society. And then the last one would be 3 fun facts about that legacy, things that we may not have known. I think this was definitely awesome. Students were able to really research the people related to in Birmingham. And then even if they were living, if I was able to make a phone call, would call them and I would set the student up with a phone interview. So it was really fun. It was really interactive. And the fact that I really, really enjoyed this is because the students were able to, they were bumping into these pioneers in the store, outside at the park. So they're living this history. They're living in the generation where some of these people are still alive and they're able to see what's going on. They're seeing them on TV. So capturing middle school minds, effective engagement techniques. So when it came to that assignment, when it comes to the students identifying or me assigning who I wanted them to work in, I didn't do that. I gave them options. So I started off with a list of about 40 or 50 people who had some type of relation to Birmingham, some type of connection to Birmingham. I wanted them to have their choice because usually if they're able to pick what they want, they give it more ownership. You know, they're more emotionally in tune with that project. So I allowed them to start with the personal connection. You can see on the left, this is an older picture of Carol Smitherman, who was a judge at one point. Maybe I have a student that wants to be a lawyer, so she chose Carol Smitherman. I have a student that's interested in becoming a mayor. Okay, so that student would choose our current mayor, which would be which would be Miranda Woodfin or Richard Arrington. So, of course, and then he was the first Black mayor of Birmingham. And then we want to make it tangible. So they're making technology resources, technology products related to these historical facts or historical contents, scaffold and technical challenges, and so on. So these connections that the students were able to make, I wanted them to really feel what they were doing. I didn't want it to just be some bland assignment or some project that they go through the motions with. I really wanted them to take control and just take ownership of their project. All right, so one of the spotlights of this project, of course, was Mr. Charles Malden. me being able to meet them, like I said, the learning tour, it really changed my life. So this is one of the apps that was created. Okay, and as you can see at the bottom, you have the home screen. You have the home screen, which would be a picture. You have the story, which would be their biography. And the students had a chance to research, look them up, what were they able to find online, what were they able to find in person through conversation, and so on. You have the fun facts, which would be that last page. Of course, he was only 17 years old during the March on Bloody Sunday. He, even to this day, he continued to speak and just speak about what happened in the past. And he's changing generations. He's exposing generations. So he's still telling his story. You also have on that favorites page, what would be the actual video. It's actually a video, a YouTube video that's linked commemorating, reflecting Bloody Sunday 58 years later. So this person decided, these two students decided to add. Okay, so that was just a little snippet of that app, and that's just one of the apps that was created. All right, so when it came to the impact, creating these apps about these pioneers, it helped the students understand their local history in an engaging, hands-on way. The students were able to gain valuable coding skills while exploring meaningful content. Now, let me rewind a little bit. What I did not review is the students already knew how to code from the past semester. So from August to December, we worked on coding skills, creating code, what code looks like, how to create basic code, what complex code look like. So in February, the students already had the skills of coding. It was just a matter of research and learning about Birmingham Black pioneers. Okay, so they already knew how to code. They learned how to code that earlier that semester. And then that second semester, we went into that project-based learning. It says students gain valuable coding skills while exploring meaningful content. Educational resources about Birmingham civil rights history. It helps students consider young people's rationales for participating in civil rights demonstration and understand the risks and rewards of their inclusion. Students was able to share their apps with the families and community members, spreading awareness of Birmingham civil rights legacy. So when it came to those apps, the apps was not uploaded into the App Store. We're not, our school, they're able to make apps, create apps, but we're not in the business of selling apps, and it was just for project and purpose. All right, so the day of the showcase, this is what happened. We invited out Birmingham leaders, Birmingham business, entrepreneurs, people who are still living who were actually able to come. So we have over to the right, Mr. Broom. He actually cut hair during the civil rights era. He's in his mid to late 80s. And he's still cutting hair. So he's sitting there looking at an app that student created on him, and he just thought that was awesome. Of course, we have Mr. Charles Malden, who, when we first walked in, and a part of the learning tour, we received trading cards. So I tried to get all the trading cards I could related to anybody in Birmingham. Really, I got any trading card that was available, but those people, the students and guests who came, they were actually able to receive a few trading cards related to the event. All right, so then we have over here to the left, I think she was sharing Sheila Smoot. Down here, we have people walking around. They were able to walk around the space and look at different apps that the students coded. Some were actually put on screen. Some were not put on screen. They were able to look at an iPad. All right, and this is what the program looked like. It ended up lasting actually about an hour, probably about an hour and a half. I didn't realize it was going to go on that long, but everyone was so intrigued with what went on and how the students were able to code and tell their stories. You know, they were looking at these historical timelines, and I do want to go back. We did have one student. We had a educator at our school who used to play out. He used to play out of the country. He played professional basketball, and we actually coded. Students created an app on him. He was an international basketball player who brought athletic excellence to the global court. But these are all the people who were coded. We have Albert Owens, Angela Davis, Carol Smitherman, of course, Charles Malden, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, Dr. Chandler, Mark Sullivan, who is our current superintendent, Dr. Michael Wesley, Ellen Spencer, Henry Finley, Ms. Broom, also coded Mr. Meadows, who's our Birmingham City Board President, Miranda Wolfen, and so on. So we tried to make sure we had a plethora of local Birmingham people who were able to come out. All right, so this is a day to remember when it came to legacy and what the students experienced. So what I did was create a video to culminate what that day looked like. A lot of the students, of course, like seeing themselves on the screen, but this was just an example of a very successful program that went on just because of the inspiration of the learning tour. Simply because of that learning tour, I've made it my business to make sure those students are able to know who they're walking amongst and what type of rich history Birmingham has. I'll play this right quick. All right, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much for sharing that. First, I do have a question. That video you played at the end, would you be able to share it in the chat? Is it public? If
It
people,
is. It's public.
that would be wonderful. I think people would really love to watch this video again. I know audio was cutting in and out a little bit, so they can kind of watch it on their own. And then also a question that I had for you as well, for a lot of the educators on this call. First of all, what you're doing is amazing work. The idea of centralizing local heroes when you're teaching history is, I mean, in a place like Birmingham, is genius, but like there are so many pockets in this country where this work can be happening. So my question is, what advice would you give to teachers if they would like to do this same work in their own respective environments? Like, how should they get started? What are some resources that they can turn to, especially if they're not coding savvy like myself?
Well, it does not have to be coding. It's just the space that I'm in. It's the area that I'm in. But even when it comes to those projects, I think, it was so personable for me just from that learning tour. If those teachers have connections already, if they have networks that they can reach out to, I would start there. I would really start there. I would start with conversations. When those students were able to have a conversation with the person that they're actually doing a project on, that really took it to the next level, and they really took it personally. So I realized that right there when they were actually able to have a conversation. But I would definitely start with whatever network they're attached to. I realize a lot of us are attached to so many networks but don't realize it until it starts with the conversation. So I would say look at the networks, who they're dealing with, and then start there. But when it comes to coding, yeah, we don't have to code. It could even be a PowerPoint, but just having some type of rubric in place to make it creative. Even if the students can create a poem about a legacy, some type of legacy related to that area, or a rap. I try to make it where the students it's relevant. Students love being on their phone. Okay, let's create an app.
Oh, that's incredible. The work you're doing is incredible. Take a second to look in the chat and see all the flowers that you are getting. That was an amazing presentation. Thank you for sharing. We're going to jump into our next presentation. And Simone, if you would like to begin sharing as I introduce you. Simone Gordon is a passionate educator, advocate, and community builder. As a 4th and 5th grade English as a new language teacher in Brooklyn, New York, she brings a global perspective to her classroom, shaped by her teaching experiences in India and Peru. Her work is driven by a deep commitment to multicultural, multilingual, and immigrant communities, ensuring that every student feels valued, heard, and empowered. She is a Common Power Institute Educator Ambassador who has been fortunate to have been on the Truth and Purpose Learning Tour, as well as attended the Common Power Educator Symposium last year in July. Currently with Common Power, she is one of the team leads for New Jersey's mayoral primary in June, if anyone is interested in canvassing. Outside the classroom, Simone finds joy in exploring new places, taking long walks, and spending time with family and friends. The amazing Simone Gordon, everyone. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. Okay, are you guys able to see my screen? Do you see the presentation?
Oh, you're on a note right now. If you minimize that, it might be hiding behind it.
Okay, let me stop. Okay,
Yeah, when you share it, it shows one of your notes.
I'm sharing my notes. Okay, I don't know how to. Okay, can you guys see my screen now?
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And you can see it?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay, good evening, everyone from the East Coast. Thank you so much, Carmen. And I wanted to just give some context before I begin. And so I went to school in New York City, Queens and Brooklyn to be specific, and have learned about American history, but not really about African Black history in its entirety. It always lacked some kind of truth or some kind of depth to it. So this led me to learn more for myself and later on as an educator now for my students, because it does matter to me what I teach and how I teach my students. I was fortunate enough to also go on the Truth and Purpose learning tours to expand my knowledge, and it really just helped to fill some of those gaps in history for me. And I just left with something even deeper, which led me to create a place-based curriculum for students to explore African and African American experience in mostly the 18th and 19th century in New York City. And so when I'm exploring this, I wanted to look at land ownership and community organizing and how Africans and African Americans were able to use that to protect themselves. These places that I'm going to be talked about were eventually destroyed or covered over, but now are being reclaimed, they're being studied and preserved, and a lot of it is through activism. So I'm going to move through a timeline of places beginning with the African Burial Ground in Manhattan, the Flatbush African Burial Ground, which is in Brooklyn, and then Seneca Village, which is also in Manhattan. And even though this context is very New York City based, I know that there's places and communities all over the US where this kind of history and these stories do live, including we were fortunate to go to Mount Bayou in the Mississippi Delta to visit. So one of those places. So kind of as a speaker before, and Carmen, you alluded to kind of centralizing local history into our curriculum. So I wanted to start with this question: how do we protect and preserve African American historical sites from erasure, and how can we use these sites to teach? And I'm going to explore this question by focusing on the role of Black activists and communities in advocating for preservation, research, and interpretation of African American heritage sites in New York City. And so for an overview of the African Burial Ground in Manhattan, so in 1626, the Dutch came. They brought with them the first enslaved Africans to Manhattan. Under the Dutch rule, Africans, they had partial freedom or gradual, were able to attain full freedom. Some were able to own land and even married legally. However, when the British took over in 1664, that changed, right? At this point, the African population was about 40%. Slavery was expanded. We like to think about Southern slavery, but in the North, it was very active. New York was the second major slave hub at that time in comparison to first being South Carolina. And so freed African rights were being revoked, and they were being banned from burying in the churchyards. And so they had to go beyond the city limits to bury their dead. And according to research, it was about approximately 20,000 graves were there over 7 acres. And because the African population was so large, they wanted to constrict how they worship, how they buried their dead. So they had to go outside of the city limits. And through urban expansion between late 1700s, early 1800s, the burial ground was eventually covered over and a lot of city development was happening. And you can see in this map, it's in 1754. It clearly shows the African burial ground and the neighborhood. You can see that Lower Manhattan was starting to kind of be built out with the grid, the city grid streets. And so just for context of where it was located. And so in the present, it was in 1991, they were constructing a new federal building where they found the remains of 419 419 individuals at the site that they didn't know about before. So it stopped the work. One of the construction agency was General Service Administration. When they began construction, one of the laws is that you have to do an archaeological dig and investigation into the site. So they said, we did our part, let's continue building. But the community was like, no, we have to pause, right? And so again, in 1999, they found 9 intact burials as they were trying to build a sidewalk. And so again, they were trying to continue to build, but the community came together, stakeholders, scholars, politicians, activists, and the public. They were like, we need to honor the people who were buried here and their legacy of building up New York as what we know it today. And so conversations started to happen. There was widespread engagement. There was visuals, ceremonies, talking for the community to learn about the spiritual and cultural heritage of the ancestors that were buried there. And the learning and the research helped us to learn more about their lives, what resistance looked like for them, some of their cultural practice of being, they buried their dead with their heads facing the west because they believe that the dead will rise to face the east in the afterlife. They found coins, metals, different things that were in their everyday living, and it was really important to spread that to the community for them to be able to kind of stop the construction of the building. And because of this activism with the General Service Administration, they stopped, research was done, and in 2006, the site was declared a national monument, the first honoring Africans in early New York. There was also a memorial in 2007 and a visitor center as well, and the museum to educate the public. And all of this came about from the community. And so this is just, I was able to bring some of my students here, again, talking about place-based education for them to learn through being at the site and asking these questions. And so this was just a quick reflection, a short reflection of one of my students.
What I learned from the African burial site is that like many Africans from the West Coast got enslaved and like they barely could like have a life. And like I don't find that okay. Like,
And
what I
and so even with that, when we're thinking about curriculum for those educators that are on the line, it's how can we bring our students into these spaces, the storytelling that happens there, the questions that they're able to ask, and just being able to just experience it using all their sensory, right? It's a different feel for them. So finding opportunities to be able to do that. And so I want to talk about the Flatbush African Burial Ground, and this is in Brooklyn, New York. So it was originally the Nalape land. Flatbush was colonized by the Dutch in 1651, and it was known as Flatbush Gardens because there was just a lot of farms. And in the 1800s, 70 to 80% of Flatbush families enslaved at least one African person. Again, let's think about like the North when we think about slavery as well. And so a lot of documentations, there wasn't a lot of documentation for who were at these burial grounds, who lived in the area as well, reflecting that systematic disregard for Africans and African Americans at this moment. However, they were able to find through books as well as some record keeping of the presence of an African burial ground on or near the site that I'm referring to. So the church that is not too far, and it's actually still up, you can go and visit it, it's still functioning as a church. They excluded most enslaved people from burial in the cemetery, So again, they had to find an area in where they were able to bury their dead. And it was close to the church area. So this small intersection between the blue and the red is where it shows the African burial ground where they found human remains. So the issue was in 2020, the city announced they were going to build a high-rise building, right? A lot of the community did not know that this was going to happen. However, for about 6 months, there was a coalition called the Flatbush African Burial Ground Coalition. It was activists, community members, educators, businesses, and allies. They came together to stop the planned housing development. They held walking tours, teaching, and they brought the community in to learn, also to heal and to strategize what will it look like. And I think one of the issue as well is that the city didn't want the people to know. They weren't going where they could pass knowledge to the barber shops, to libraries, to churches, or different businesses or places of worship for the community to be involved. They just wanted to kind of disregard what they found and continue to build. So again, that role of sustained activism and knowledge sharing and learning in our community. So what now? So the Flatbush African Burial Ground is now under the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. They were able to give it to that department to oversee to think about how it would look for a memorial park to honor the enslaved Africans and their descendants. And it was also designated a New York City landmark in 2007. And that again was because of community-led organizing. And so I want us to talk about the last one, Seneca Village. This is where current Central Park is. We're going to watch this video.
Central Park is a staple of New York City life for both residents and millions of visitors from around the world. But what was there before the beloved green space existed just may surprise you. Back in the 1800s, from 1825 to 1857, more than 200 people called it home. Seneca Village. Chances are you've never heard of it. This flourishing African-American settlement was right in the middle of modern-day Central Park, home to a vibrant group of Black property owners. And over the past few decades, historians, New Yorkers, and Seneca descendants have started preserving and sharing this once-forgotten story, like Diane Jones Randall.
I grew up with a father who was very interested in history.
Diane is the daughter of the late Cal Jones, a passionate historian who devoted much of his life to uncovering and sharing the story of Seneca Village.
One of the things that was important to him was understanding where we all came from. There was this population of African-American working class people who were the first significant group of homeowners, of property owners in New York in the mid-1800s.
And it's so hard to believe that it was right here where we are in Central Park.
They built homes, they built schools, they built churches, and they built their own finances. And they were able to do it at a time when that was not an easy thing for Black people.
And it's a beautiful story when you hear of it, but it's also a sad story because I want to ask the question, okay, what happened?
The city utilized the power of eminent domain and decided this is where Central Park is going to be. So it was a story of the removal of a population of people who had established homes. And that story has happened in other places.
Eminent domain refers to the power of a government to take private land for public use. The practice has often resulted in the displacement of marginalized communities. Another example of this is Bruce's Beach in Southern California.
This is only the first step in our fight for justice for Charles and Willa Bruce and their descendants.
In the 1920s, the city seized that land from the Bruce family using the power of eminent domain. At a very rare turn of events, in 2021, the city restored the land to the descendants of the family, land that is worth millions today. Are people ever shocked when they hear this story?
Central Park has a singular story. It's like you talk about Central Park, you don't think about the street grid, you don't think about the people who lived there before. You're experiencing the now moment. I think that's the sad thing about Black history is everybody sees it as this point of negative interaction. There was that, but there's also this history of what we did carve out in our lives here and how we contributed. And we're not willing to look at the bright side. We can't really understand what was lost.
So when African Americans left Seneca Village, where did they go?
A lot of different places.
As the director of community outreach projects, John Reddick is working to protect and spread the story of Seneca Village.
It sounds like a huge project just to try and collect artifacts and sort of like, go back and sort of lay out.
I mean, the challenge for us is like to evoke what those lives must have been like, and you understand the joy of what was there.
Today, the site of records of Seneca Village provide a wealth of information for those eager to learn about the past. But the truth remains that a thriving community was disbanded to create public space. Now, Diane, John, and others are focused on continuing to tell the story of this uniquely preserved piece of American history.
Do you feel like you have a responsibility?
And so Seneca Village, as was shared, right, was this the African American middle class society that often is overlooked. They were laborers, some worked in hotels, cartsmen. There was women as well who worked as laundress. The people, they had their own gardens and they raised their own livestock. There was this, they had they worked for themselves sometimes as well, self-sufficiency of how can we work together to sustain ourselves. A lot of Seneca Village African Americans who moved there was because of racism, health concerns, and overcrowdedness that was happening in Lower Manhattan. And so this area became kind of a refuge for them. It even gave Black men at this moment a way to engage in politics, because if you owned land, you were able to vote. And so all of that was being stripped from them when the government came in, when the city came in and said, we want your land. And I think that idea, we're not looking at that when we go to Central Park, when we see the trees, and it's beautiful, but there is that history and that there's that legacy that remained. A lot of the people was not compensated properly for their property, or if at all. And so this is a picture of an abolitionist that they also, doing some research, have found that he was an abolitionist, and the Underground Railroad was connected to Seneca Village as well. The circle shows a church. They had churches, there was homes, there were cemeteries, there was a lot of businesses. So that idea of that community coming together to provide for themselves, and all of that was stripped from them. And so activism and community came in. Cal Jones, how was shared in the video, he used a lot of census records, deed titles, court and church documents, newspapers, to kind of learn more about Seneca Village. He wanted to trace the lineage, and for the descendants of today to find them and to be able to kind of share the stories. And so the universities got involved as well, and were able to start conducting digs of the site. It really showed when they were doing this research how this middle class, African-American middle class lived. Porcelains they were able to find, small shoes, right? So kind of imagining what their life was like. And if you're ever in New York, at the Met, they have an exhibition. It's called Before Yesterday We Could Fly, an Afrofuturistic period room, which kind of reconstructs that historical moment for interpretation, and also allows viewers to really think what it could look like in the future for Black people. And my students and I were able to go there. This is after us learning about the legacy and the people, the community that was there in Seneca Village. They were able to interact with some of the maps, ask questions, and be in that space and kind of like imagine what life would have been like. There were some structures where there was remained of a building, right? So for them to see that, I thought was, and especially have English language learners, so having them see it allow them to process that information of what that their lives could have been like in that time period. So again, going back to that place-based education. And so I do want to talk about some takeaways that I learned and that was left with me as we're looking at the African Burial Ground in Manhattan, the Flatbush Burial Ground in Brooklyn, and Seneca Village. There's the recognition of hidden histories. These spaces reclaim dignity for Black ancestors who were omitted from mainstream narrative. Again, these cities were built on the back of African and African American laborers, and the stories is often omitted. So it brings it back to that. We also think about activism in the community. It was very grassroots, often led by Black community members. We saw in Africa, the African Burial Ground, it was preserved due to protest. The Seneca Village was researched and remembered due to public pressure, and the Flatbush Burial Ground was paused because of community-led organizing. And so it shows a model of what Black community resistance looked like. When we think of like slavery, for example, a lot of times it's not taught that enslaved Africans did resist, they revolted. They didn't do certain things in an act of protest. And that history and that legacy continued through these communities. They often had to find ways to sustain themselves because of segregation, because of slavery and legal exclusion practices as well. We see the community coming together to sustain themselves in Seneca Village, planting and growing their own food. And so thinking about how we can continue that, we do see that now, like we have in the Black Lives Matter movement, people coming together. Another question that for me that it posed, or something for us to think about, is the politics of memory and land. The sites really raise questions of who gets remembered in public history, what happens when Black communities are displaced or erased, and how should the land be returned or memorialized? The communities did come together and think, what is the way to do that with dignity for remembrance? And I think also when we think about that memory and land, a lot of it is through storytelling and sharing what happened, passing it down, right? So we don't forget. And the last thing I want us to think about is conversations between the intergenerational conversation that gets to be had on a lot of our truth and our learning tours. We were able to have those discussions for people who were there during the civil rights movement and participating in different ways. We had conversation with them. And so for today, we want to preserve these sites because it also speaks and tell the stories for future generations. The placards that is had, for example, in all of the sites, actually, Seneca Village, the Interpretation Center, in the African Burial Ground, they have this interactive space that speaks about what before enslavement happened, what the culture was, what the culture and the people, what their lives were like on the continent of Africa. And so we want to also engage our young people to be civically engaged in their own community, for them to kind of continue to be advocates. Advocacy is really important. And so we want to be able to kind of empower our young people to continue to do so. And I do want to leave with this. So these are some laws. It does protect African American historical sites. So whether it's in your local community that you research and find and you want action to be done, there are ways for it to happen. And so one of them is the National Historic Preservation Act. That is, federal agency must consider impacts on historical Black sites. That right now is facing budget cuts for 2026 with this administration. So I do urge you to contact your congressperson and make sure that we are letting them know like this is important. And you have the African American Burial Grounds Preservation Act, that's more recent, 2022. Even though it funds the preservation and the study and the research of African American cemeteries and burial grounds, it supports the mapping as well and community engagement efforts. Even though it passed, places have yet to receive funding, federal funding. So this is another area for advocacy work and contacting our Congress people, get some money going into that. And for businesses and property owners, they also get 20% federal credit for restoring listed historical Black-owned properties. So there's tax credits and local landmark laws. Cities can protect African American sites from demolition. We saw that with the Flatbush African Burial Ground in Brooklyn. So there are ways and that was through the community, right? And the city had to act to protect that site. So these are some of the ways that we can also take action. And lastly, I would say also is for us to just think about how can we get local history into our curriculum? These are not talked about in New York City curriculum. So how can we put these topics, right, this rich history that, Black African American history is also American history. How can we get it into our curriculum as well, pushing for that, because our students need to be part of that collective storytelling and memory, because when we keep that alive, they won't forget. And so they will be able to kind of keep being civically engaged and to continue sharing and learning for themselves so that we can move forward. Thank you.
Simone, that was super dope. I feel like I just got a really good lesson. I'm over here taking notes as you were talking. A question for you: what do you feel like was the biggest takeaway from your students as you talked about the intimate, factors of slavery being something that is, in a state like New York? Because you started off talking about the differences between the North and South. The North doesn't really get a lot of attention. So can you speak a little bit more to what the students' perspective was, understanding and kind of expanding on that video that you showed?
Yes, sure. And so again, I do teach 4th and 5th grade students, so a younger audience, and I teach English language learners as well. So for me, it is for them just being in the place, they didn't know. First off, they didn't know, right? They didn't know that their enslavement happened, or even what that word they don't even know what the word means. So for them to know people didn't have rights, they were forced to work, and then being in the place, right, and seeing there was videos and things that they were able to interact with in the museum, having that experience, I think kind of made it real. For them, it was even just the fact of knowing this is right and this is not, and this is not. Right? This is right, this is wrong. So in that kind of terms, for the younger population that I deal with, was really critical for me, for them to just understand it, even at that fundamental level, and then kind of building upon it. I think being in the places to allow them to see and ask questions of why did that happen? Why didn't people do anything about it? And I also really wanted them to see for them to learn as well. Like it wasn't just they didn't do anything, right? There was this richness of advocacy and resistance as well. Building, they had that a middle-class African-American community in Seneca Village, right? They were able to, even though they were excluded from burial grounds, made their own and still able to keep up with their cultural practices. And those are acts of resistance for survival. And so sharing with my students, that was really important for them to know.
Yeah, thank you so much. I also was taking an aggressive amount of notes. As someone in New York who I know the sites you're talking about, and I really appreciate you bringing them to light because you're right, it's not in the curriculum for New York City. And those aren't even the only 3 sites that exist in New York City like that, right? Like there are, I don't even know the number, there's so many. I appreciate you bringing that to light. You asked something in the end, kind of calling on us to think about how we can get this in the curriculum. And I think the ask that I have for everybody on this call is to maybe share common power with your peers, because I think if everybody sees your presentation right now, they're going to feel charged enough to put it in their curriculum because, you know, educators are being punished for teaching history, but it's not stopping us, right? It's not stopping you. It's not stopping me. It's not stopping the people on this call. And I think people will be inspired by the work you just did. And I mean, it's, you have a gift and we should share it with people. I don't know if you're seeing the love in the chat, by the way, for you. There is so much love in the chat. So definitely take your flowers. But yeah, I just wanted to share that appreciation. And also all of these presentations, for the audience, people do this separately, right? But I'm seeing such a thread between them already, this idea of community and the power within the community and the storytelling within the community. So I just want to thank so far the 2 presenters for their work because it's incredibly engaging.
Thank you. And that's just the last thing, as you said, right? There's so much. There's Weeksville in Brooklyn. There's in the Bronx. There's so many places, and I know in community across the U.S. and people that are on the line, I'm sure there's that rich history as well of places and communities that existed of African Americans and other people as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Simone.
That's great. That's great. And last but not least, the civic engagement piece that she talked about, everybody, I think more than ever, we got to think about being more civically engaged. 2 things for the audience. Number 1, if you have a cohort member that you're really close with, text them and tell them to come on. We got 3 more presenters for the day. And then number 2, make sure that when you are chatting, if you have something just for the panelists, please feel free to send us anything that you got. But otherwise, make sure your settings are for everyone, because we do want everybody to see who's presenting, all the great things that you all have to say, because we want to keep those ideas flowing. So Simone, thank you again. We are going to move on to our next presenter, Miss Nina McLean. So I'm going to give her brief introduction. Give me 1 second, let me get it pulled up. Hey. All right. So Ms. Nina McLean is a 24-year veteran educator and has been privileged to serve the children, families, and community of East St. Louis School District number 189. She has served as a classroom teacher, summer school principal, district curriculum writer, lead teacher, coach, mentor, and literacy coordinator. Nina is also the recipient of a 2023-24 St. Louis Excellence in Education Award, as well as a recipient of the 2025-26 Southern Illinois Region Teacher of the Year. Ms. McLean also attained her master's in educational administration from McKendree University in Lebanon, Illinois, and a bachelor's of science from Western Illinois University, Macomb, Illinois. And she is currently pursuing her doctorate at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. She is also, and last but most certainly not least, she is also a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army Reserve. So thank you for all of your service, and especially servicing the country. So we are going to get her presentation up here in just a bit. As we get these things started, please don't forget, you can ask all of the questions that you need to in the chat using the Q&A function and or just general chat, especially if you have audience questions for the panelists as they're presenting. Ms. Nina, we got your audio. I can hear you. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. I can't see my picture there. Can't get the camera going.
All right, let's see. I'm going to ask to start video, see if you got any notification from the Zoom to start video. There you go.
Hey,
all right.
hey.
There you go. Hey, hey, hey.
All right. I wasn't nervous until Simone and this first presenter went. Now I'm a little nervous. I'm pretty good at teaching, but they got me a little shook here. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ivory. I've got a lot to share tonight, so I'm going to get started, and I'm going to just give a disclaimer right away. I am going to try my best to get through everything, but I have not made it yet. So I want to make sure I make it through. Can you guys see my slides right now?
No, ma'am.
Okay, let me try something else. Let me do it right here. Share.
There we go.
All right, you see them now?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I think we're good to go. All right, so I'm going to talk about youth sales, and no one absolutely knows what that means. Why? Because we totally made it up in college. It was unbelievable, stupid A laws that our track coach came up with. So you would not know it. I do. What I've turned it into is unbelievable scholarly articles, advertisement, and laws. And so we're going to discuss just a little bit about discussion through fish bowls and Socratic seminars. I'm going to take you through some scholarly articles, some advertisement, and some laws, and specific ones, so that you can kind of get a glimpse of what we do in our classroom to advocate for students and to lead discussions for them to talk about things that are going on in the world right now and in history. So what are these things that we call fish bowls and Socratic seminars? Let me talk to you about each one a little bit separately. So fishbowl is a strategy to facilitate some group discussion. And normally what we have are students sitting just like that picture you see down in the lower right-hand corner. There's outside students, there's inside students. The ones on the inside will talk. The ones on the outside are like they're observing, they're taking notes, and then we switch places a lot of times. A fishbowl can also be exactly what it says. You put a bowl in the middle of a table of students, you put some questions in, they sit in those groups, especially if you got lots of shy students that don't want to talk a lot and they just can talk in that group that they're used to. You sit it in that middle section. They have those discussions as you walk around and they discuss it in their groups. If they want to share out as a whole group, you give them that opportunity. Socratic seminars are just a little bit different. It is also going to invite students to facilitate discussion. However, in a Socratic seminar, students are creating questions. Students are responding to text most of the time. It's some reading they've done. So I heard our first presenter was a librarian, having given them a book to read, and then sharing those notes with each other and saying what they got from that book is more what a Socratic seminar does, usually based off of text. Fish bowls, they can be off of text, but they also can just be off of some questions and topics that you want to discuss. All right, so here is my why. Very simply put, the aim of argument, which is really more for me discussion, although we do have a debate team, should not be victory, but progress. We only progress forward when we actually share and discuss things. If you sit in a bubble all by yourself, nothing gets out and nothing gets in. So that's absolutely what discussion is to me. So I'm going to teach it to you kind of like I teach it to my students. We're going to talk a little bit of a more adult type questions and topics, but this is usually what they would get. If I'm doing a fishbowl, I want to give them the questions ahead of time. So why is a scholarly article considered one of the most dangerous means to pass on racism? What should happen if misinformation is written in scholarly articles? What would you consider to be true data in a study, and how should it be obtained? So I want you to think about those three questions. You're going to see them again at the end, and then we'll write a little bit about them. And I want you to write on all three just one. And you can put that in the chat if you want to. No forcing here today. All right, so I'm going to begin with this article that blew my mind. In 2010, Satoshi Kanazawa, a blogger for Psychology Today, which is one of the largest media enterprises devoted to coverage of human behavior and mental health. In other words, I'm going to put it in big old fifth grade terms. It's a huge deal in psychology to have an article put into Psychology Today. That is one of the premier articles or magazines that psychologists and social scientists would write in. He wrote an article that was entitled, "Why Are Black Women Today Less Physically Attractive Than Other Women?" Blew everybody's mind. He got a lot of heat for that. A lot of people arguing with him, of course. But he kind of refuted everyone and said in his article, he said it was objective. He did interviews with people. He did surveys. He did IQ test results and brought that in. And this is what he came up with, that Black women today, according to most people, are less attractive than any other woman. So, of course, the Psychology Today came out and disqualified the article. Not by much. They just said that some of what he put into his article was not true and could not be verified. He did pay the subjects that came in to take his survey questions $5. I know how that's big money, but $5 to answer some survey questions of what they felt was beautiful or intelligent, and show them some pictures of different women. Who's most beautiful, who's intelligent, looking to you, all of those things. So they said everything could not be quantified. So they came back and said, hey, you're kind of wrong there, Satoshi. We're going to give you, this is his punishment, 1 year from writing. 1 year from writing this blog. That was all he received. And so he sent an apology. And this is what he said in it. In retrospect, I should have been more careful in selecting the title of the blog post and the language that I used to express my ideas. In the aftermath of its publication, from all the criticisms that I have received, I have learned that some of my arguments may have been flawed and not supported by the available evidence. In my blog post, I did not give due consideration to my approach to the interpretation of the data and my use of language. Now, not a great apology. And what's furthermore is he didn't apologize to the women, the Black women especially, that he talked about and kind of demeaned. He wrote it to Psychology Today. So the apology was not to Black women, it was to Psychology Today. So I'm saying this because we're going to talk about a scholarly article and someone who wrote one, and then we're going to do a Socratic a fishbowl on those questions we looked at before. So I want to talk about a Canadian, Jean-Philippe Rushton. He's the author of Race, Evolution, and Behavior, a Life History Perspective, written July 1st, 2000. In this, he distributed his article, his book, it's not even an article, it's a small book, paperback book, unsolicited to tens of thousands of social scientists, many who were in college about to become degreed as social scientists. So he gave it to tens of thousands. And we'll talk about where that money came from for him to make that book and send it out. In that, he promised to explain why races differ in crime rates, learning abilities, and also AIDS prevalence. And at the time, AIDS was very prevalent at the time. And the data covered Blacks, whether they were in Africa, America, Haiti, it didn't matter where Blacks were, he said it covers all diasporas of Blacks, African Americans, not African Americans, Africans, Black people. All right, so findings. When compared, this was his finding in his final article, when compared to whites and Asians, that should be Black, not Black, Black people tended to be more sexually aggressive, while less intelligent, less capable of self-control, less capable of complex social organizations. And he went on to explain that's why the people we see in politics are mostly Caucasian, white, or to his extent, Asian, and then had low family stability. So the families couldn't be stable either because they were so less intelligent and so sexually aggressive. In June of 2005, that was his first article, he published another article, and this one went into Psychology, Public Policy, and Law, a journal that psychologists read on a normal, and they actually do pass that out in universities. So he argued that Asians were smarter than whites, okay, who whites were smarter than blacks. So if we're going down a hierarchy, it started with Asians, then whites, and then blacks. Why is this important? Because we have people write racist stuff all the time. Well, here's why, and especially to our young people who are in schools, who don't see a link between history when people are writing something offensive to Black people or people of color to now. Fox News in 2005 reported the study's finding on its channel's website. It put it in its website as factual information. Now, some people will say, oh, that's Fox, you know, they do some stuff like that. Whether that's your opinion or not, some people will blow that off. But CNN had a medical correspondent covered that same report and reported that the study, reported a study that was found in that article also that said men on average are smarter than women. And so in both of those coverages by Fox and CNN, this gentleman, Jean-Philippe Rushton, was described as an academic psychologist. He wasn't told that he had any background with supremacy groups, which he did. So where the money came from for his books, tens of thousands of books that he gave out, was from a supremacy group that was funding him. None of that was put into these articles. None of this was put in that coverage that talked about him. If you look in that lower right-hand corner, that's the book, which is still, by the way, on sale at Amazon. So you can purchase that book on Amazon right now today. And so all of this to say that scholarly articles are people who are defined as being big scholars, making conversation and making research founded, I lost my word, sorry, saying that research is backing them and what they're doing. And if you say a scholar is doing that, then most people are going to give it some type of credit, some type of validation. So here's our questions again. Without me telling you how to feel, because I wouldn't tell my students, we talk about it, of course, and debrief. Why is a scholarly article considered one of the most dangerous means to pass on racism? What should happen if misinformation is written in scholarly articles? And what would you consider to be a true data in a study? And how should it be obtained? If you can take a second to put that in the chat for just a second, I'll pause for about 30 seconds and then move on. All right, I'm going to go to the next section. We talked about unbelievable scholarly articles. Sorry, guys, I just got braces. I'm trying to work with them. Unbelievable scholarly articles. And now we're on advertisement or ads. So don't answer these questions yet. We're going to talk about these three as well here in a second. I'll give you time to answer it at the end. Why are some African-American civil rights organizations trying to hold advertisement companies responsible for negative images of Black people? Why would they want to hold companies responsible for that? Should companies now be held responsible for their actions in the past? Specifically, if they are now owned by new companies or managed by new CEOs, how could it be their fault? Should they be held responsible? And finally, why is advertising so impactful to American culture? And so I'm going to go down the road just a little bit on advertising and what impact it has on our culture and what we've seen in history. So what you see before you is advertisements for slaves. And many of us have seen this in history. A lot of our students may have seen this. If not, fantastic place to start. Fantastic place to start in history. Seeing how slaves were auctioned. That's an advertisement. There were companies that were paid to make this advertisement and tout wares of people being sold. The African slave being sold. But it didn't just stop there. They also, in Germany, were trying to motivate people to vote on what's called Slate 10, was basically to remove Jewish people from Germany. So it wasn't just a Black problem here in America, it's other places, as well as this was an advertisement, the one to your right, from here in America about Japanese Americans. And so they were trying to motivate people to go to work in factories by saying, Tojo very happy. Sends congratulations to you for being absent last week and losing man hours. So basically, when you don't show up for work, you're losing man hours. You're making Japan win the war. You need to be here. Don't stay at home. Make sure you show up for work every day. That's part of being American. That's part of being patriotic. So we have advertisements not just for African American slaves, but for other ethnic groups as well. I'm going to focus just a little while on the tobacco industries and its advertisements. So I told you we're going to be very specific with some of these. So here we talked about Jean-Philippe Rushton for the scholarly articles. We'll talk about cigarette companies for advertisements. So before the 1940s and 1950s, tobacco companies, they only featured African Americans and racist ads, and they used caricature. So what you see to advertise to white customers and consumers. All of those were cigarettes that were for sale during that time before the 1940s. And just so you know, down in the lower right, Banjo Tobacco Company was actually owned by R.J. Reynolds. If you don't know who R.J. Reynolds are, you possibly know these brands of cigarettes: Camel, Newport. All of those are part of R.J. Reynolds. $49 billion they paid $49 billion for R.J. Reynolds not too long ago, and they were acquired by the British American Tobacco Company. So, big money, big business. After the 1940s and 50s, African Americans, it was what we call the Second Great Migration. African Americans began to move in urban areas. So, what did the cigarette companies decide? Hey, we've got to revamp how we've been selling cigarettes, because now we've got all these Black people who have money. They're earning better wages. So in 1945, after World War II came to an end, the industry is property. And I hate that word property, and goes back to those for sale signs for slaves as well. But it needed to maintain its property. It needed some money. So it did mass marketing efforts, began targeting African Americans as a demographics, and it became urban centered because they knew that African Americans were earning more money. So now if you look at the advertisements, they're so much better. Hey, you want to be cool for Newport, same company, R.J. Reynolds. All of these, and Cool, all of these were trying to get African Americans to spend their money on this. And if we have more time, I'll talk about alcohol and cigarettes in the Black community, but I'm going to stay focused on this. So here are today's advertisements. And just so I can go back for just a second before I begin, Philip Morris, I'll go back for this slide. Philip Morris, which is one of the cigarette companies that did the same thing, just so you know, it's not just against African Americans or Blacks. Philip Morris has a manufacturing company, or had a manufacturing company, in the same site as Auschwitz, where they were killing Jewish people. They took the factories that they used to murder Jewish people, and they turned it into a cigarette factory. So there is it's almost like there's no shame in what they do. We're going to make caricatures of you at first, but now you got money. Hey, we're going to make you seem cool. And that company at Auschwitz was in the 1990s. So money is the motivating factor here. So here's today's advertisements, and this is from H&M Fashion. This is clothing. So if you can't see the t-shirt, it says "Coolest Monkey in the Jungle." And I just want you to put in the chat whether you would consider this racist or not, because there is a debate over, hey, is this really racist? or is it just a slogan or saying? Is number one racist or not? Here's number two. Always bet on black. We paid out early on Mayweather victory. So this is always bet on black. What could be racist about this advertisement? Is this racist or not? Number three, this is again an advertisement for sale of it's just a mask. You're going to have to tell me why you think that's racist or what was considered to be racist. If you believe it is, yes, no for number three. Here's number four. It said black cars matter. Once you go black, you never go back. These are all true advertisements, folks. I can't make this up. And this one is, I'll play the one in the bottom left-hand corner in just a second, but it's going to show you the depiction from old history to now. And so back before in the early 1900s, they had a Pears soap company. And basically it was saying, oh, it could wash the dirt off of you if you notice the black kid turns out to be white. Well, in the advertisement, Chinese advertisement, the Asian lady really finds the black guy kind of attractive, but there's something wrong. She just can't date this black guy. So she puts him in a washing machine and look at what he comes out at the end. Respectable Asian boy. So that is a true advertisement that's been playing on Asian TV. So here we go with advertisement. I'm going to share this last one with you, and you tell me what you see is racist in this advertisement. Hopefully it plays right and it doesn't give you off what's happening. All right, so I'm going to just tell you guys now that the problem that many people had with this advertisement was that the lighter is better, and the sliding of that bottle past all these dark-skinned people until it got to someone who was what? Lighter. So that was, Chance the Rapper actually came out against this advertisement, and so that's what we got there, folks. I'm not going to tell you what to think because that's not what a Socratic Seminar Fishbowl does. It lets you think on your own. So I'm going to go back to these questions again. Number one, why are some African American civil rights organizations trying to hold advertisement companies responsible for negative images of Black people? Should companies now be held responsible for their actions in the past? Specifically, if they're now owned by new companies or managed by new CEOs. And three, why is advertising so impactful to American culture? And I'm going to pause 30 seconds again. I am watching the time. I'm going to pause for 30 seconds and give you guys time to kind of answer that. And just so you know, before I move on, as of 2022, the revenue size of global tobacco products market was $912 billion. And it's projected to grow 3.75% by 2028. So it's not slowing down. All right. I want to talk about this because I'm going to bring this to a close. I've got about 6 minutes. So these are some topics that my students have actually discussed. They've talked about truancy and arresting parents if their child is truant. They've talked about the Crown Act, having natural hair and natural hair designs in the school, and the law that was recently passed, I believe, in 2021 regarding the Crown Act. Mental health, and does it really belong in the school? Cell phone use in school. Are we honoring Brown versus the Board of Education today? Are we honoring it in the classroom? Standardized tests and IQ testing, immigration in America. What does right look like? What does right look like? What does immigration in America, what does right really look like? Riots, are they the voice of the unheard, or are they just violence? Should it state Black Lives Matter, or should it say all lives matter? Should we celebrate Black History Month, bullying, and then finances in our community? And those are just a few. We try to hold Socratic seminars or fishbowls every Wednesday, which is early dismissal. It gives us the opportunity to sit and really talk about some issues that are affecting our young people, but not just our young people, affecting people globally, not just only here in America. And as I said before, having a conversation and discussion opens us up to hearing each other and solving some problems. And so I want to take you here because I want to talk about Common Power and what it's done for me. Number one, all that you just saw, the Socratic seminars, the topics that we talked about, kind of got started and geared up going on my Truth and Purpose tour in, I believe, September of last year. I think it was last year. It feels like I've been on the Truth and Purpose tour forever, but I believe it was last year. And so I did apply for the grant and got a grant for financial literacy. So what you see in the classroom are students working on checks, balancing budgets. They did do some advertisements where they had to sell a product also, and then talk about how much it was going to be to make that product. We also had a financial night for our 5th grade parents. So our parents came in, and we talked to them about financial literacy, budgeting, and how to get their kiddos to college and how to start now if they haven't already started. And then our students also did a commercial about financial literacy, the history of it in the Black community and Hispanic community, both because we have quite a few students who are English language learners in our school building. So we also focus on both sides of that spectrum. And so it has been fantastic just to sit and learn and use all the tools that Common Power has supplied to me in my classroom. I do not have time to go over the law questions. I wish I did. But I am going to save that because I just know that, guess what? They are going to invite me back to share at another time. So I think I'm done. I think I'm actually 2 minutes right on time. I'm good. I'm so good sometimes.
Miss Nina, thank you. Yeah, it was incredible. I mean, it was infuriating actually, as I was like watching every example pop up on the screen, but really powerful. And I can see the ways in which you're using that in your classroom. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about that. You work with pretty young students, and one of the criticisms we get in education, especially for young learners, is to talk about these things. They're not ready. It's too hard, right? They're too sensitive yet or haven't experienced. So can you speak a little bit about, like, maybe respond to that and say a bit about your approach in the classroom with a younger age group?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So what I would show adults all the time may not necessarily be what I would show students, but I'm still going to address the issue. And a lot of times what our students do is they come to us with issue. I didn't bring up bullying. I didn't bring up gay rights. My students did. These are things that are already affecting them. We had a student who tried to commit suicide. And so we talk about things that are burdening them, because if you don't, guess what? It's all bottled up inside them, and that's the more trauma that they're dealing with. Everyone wants to talk about trauma-informed education. Well, in order to deal with trauma, you really have to address it, don't you? You have to talk about it, and they have to see that they're not alone in this. When we talked about the Crown Act, it was nice to hear a Hispanic student say, "Hey, I love how your hair is," to a Black girl, because my hair will not stay put together in a braid like that. I got to put 1,000 tons of mousse on it. And it opened up things. So it's not about being scared, it's about how you address it. And then it's about letting the students have the conversation that they want to have. I hope that answered you.
Yeah, for sure. I want to give an opportunity for Carmen or Ivory. Do you have any other follow-up questions? We got a minute before we kick it over to Rob.
I just want to say thank you. That was
Yeah,
great.
for sure.
I love the fire and the passion. And I think more conversations need to be had in schools like that. Like the list that you showed, I put a comment. I said, that could be a list of lectures within itself. So I'm just grateful for what you shared. So thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you, Miss Nina. Really appreciate you. Good to see you.
Good, same.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to introduce us to our next speaker today. Who's actually been a friend of mine for a really long time. So I'm really excited to have Rob with us to tell us a little bit more about his work. Rob Smith is an Institute for Common Power Educator Ambassador. He's been in the classroom for 21 years, 3 in the middle school and 18 teaching high school history. For the past 2 years, Rob has been building the first ethnic studies class in his district's history. While teaching, he has also enjoyed coaching basketball and track at the high school and middle school levels. Rob lives in Buckley, Washington, with his wife and 2 children who are a freshman and a senior at the high school he teaches at. It's awesome. Rob and family love to travel, experience, and learn about amazing traditions and cultures from around the world. And he's here today to teach us a little bit more about his approach in his school district. Rob, it's really good to be with you.
All right, thanks for such a nice introduction. I want to first say I'm honored to be on with such amazing educators and included with them. And it's good to see a lot of faces that I've missed for, a few months here. I'll go ahead and share my screen and get started. All right, here we go. Okay, I'm going to be talking about teaching Black history and ethnic studies in a predominantly white school district. Just a little background. Luke kind of went over some of it already. But I think for context, a little bit about my background is important. I grew up about an hour south of Seattle in a small rural town without very much diversity. I went off to college and studied political science and then got my master's in education. My wife and I have an 18-year-old daughter who's attending UW in the fall, go Dogs, and a 15-year-old son. And like Luke said, I've been teaching in public schools for the past 21 years. My first teaching job was at a high school just south of Tacoma. It's actually where I met Luke, and I had the honor of teaching with him for 5 or 6 years and then being friends for about the last 20. And I taught there for 15 years. It's one of the more diverse schools in our area. I think currently it's about 28% white. And 6 years ago, I moved to my current school district where I taught middle school for 3 years. And then the past 3 years, I have been teaching at the high school. This is the race and ethnicity breakdown of the high school that I am currently at. So it's pretty different than the one that I was at when I taught with Luke. This one, it was having grown up in a similar community. I was surprised how foreign it felt after having been somewhere else for a long time. And in our district, like many, we have lots of flyers and stuff that talk about who we are and what our values are and things like that. And one of the things that I want to give a lot of credit to my superintendent and high school admin for is a lot of people talk about equity and what that looks like, but a lot of times it's just lip service. Down here at the bottom, I really think that the superintendent in the high school admin is dedicated to equity being achieved by identifying and removing barriers through culturally responsive practices at every level. And that can be challenging, and there can be a lot of pushback in a community like ours, but they've been very supportive of me and some of what we've been doing. One of the ways that they have, I think, done a really great job is they realize the need to hear how our students are feeling and how our students of color are experiencing school in our school district. And so in this, we've done 3 studies in 2019, 2021, and 2024 to try and get insight at the level of peer and teacher support that makes students feel affirmed, engage the students' understanding of how they think the school or classroom can better represent their ethnic history and background. And this work was conducted by Stephen Akufo. He's a counselor and social worker in the area, and he conducted the interviews and analysis that resulted in his recommendations that I'm going to share. I remember it was before the start of the school year, my second year in my current school district, and he gave a presentation similar to what I'm going to share with you, and it was his findings and some of the things that our students were saying about their experience in our school district. And so there were 4 primary objectives: to learn from the student's perspective on making school more welcoming and affirming for all students, gain insight into whether or not students feel supported by teachers and peers, and to learn from the student's perspective how the school and classroom can better represent or reflect their ethnic history and background, and develop a list of recommendations and next steps based on the results. And so when I saw some of what our kids were saying about their experiences, it really felt like a punch in the gut. The question was, does the curriculum at school represent you and make you feel affirmed, or what does the multicultural curriculum look like? An African-American student said, U.S. history, we were talking about slaves, and it gets so awkward. I started skipping history because kids would start making comments to me or at me. The teacher tried to kick them out, but they continued. And I'm going to do something I tell my students not to do. I'm going to pretty much read the screen verbatim because I want to make sure I'm capturing the exact words of these kids. Another student said, it's not what we learn, it's about how people act about what we learn. When they talk about slavery, kids look at us and smile. It might give some people a different look. They ask us, is that your cousin or great uncle? The findings, those 2 were really gut punches that I didn't realize I had kids skipping classes as a result of these experiences, and that this was what was going on. So based on a census of responses, the students did not feel the present curriculum at our high school was affirming or relevant to their situation or circumstances. Most did feel that the existing pedagogy was pervasive, contradictory, and antithetical to their existing cultural group beliefs. That's a pretty hard thing to hear about the place that you work, that this is the reality for some of our kids. Another question that was asked, do you feel supported by the staff at your school? What do you think the support by your teachers at school looks like? And on this one, this is our Latinx and Asian Pacific Islanders. Because the community for some of these groups is so small, they put them together so as not to have the kids able to really be identified as, because they wanted the kids to speak freely and keep it anonymous. So when there's a white teacher and the whole class is white, the teacher makes more connections with the white kids, and I feel left out. There are a few, but others that just don't care and turn a blind eye to racism. There's a handful of staff that are like good. The rest are just like these kids, just grown up. The findings, this year's focus group provided clear insights into a glaring issue concerning staff engagement and support of the marginalized student population. Students expressed a sense of disconnection with staff and did not view staff as a source of support. Students voiced concerns associated with feeling unseen or heard by staff when social emotional concerns are reported or shared. And this is, I think, the last questions I'm going to go through, and then I'll get to what we're doing. Do you feel like the school represents your ethnic history and background, or what would it look like for the school to represent your ethnic history and background? Learning about the Boston Tea Party, American independence, learning about America, not learning about my ethnicity, learning about Vikings, Native American, nothing about my background. Another student, we don't get a chance to really celebrate our heritage. And last part, because we live in such a small town, there are so many white people, and it just makes it hard. If we were all in a setting together, they'd be like segregation is back, so we avoid sitting together. And then one that made me feel at least some level of hope is that my ethnic studies class did. Mr. Smith was class was amazing. Spanish teacher is Mexican, and we go through vocab and explain the relevance in our culture. So now this is from multiple years of this study. And so when I initially had found out about what the kids were saying and how some of our kids were feeling, we didn't have an ethnic studies class yet. So I'm feeling hopeful that by adding ethnic studies and trying to do some of the work that I'm trying to do in our school district in collaboration with some others is going to be having a positive effect. So findings based on student comments, like the last study, they felt like the school lacked tangible, visual, and social evidence that shows the school represents their ethnocultural and diverse history and background. However, there were representations in ethnic studies class. So this is the gentleman that gave the presentation initially. And I spent some time reaching out to him and sitting and meeting with him to try and figure out, like, okay, now I know better. I need to do better. I realized that unintentionally I've been doing harm in my classroom for 16 years in the way that I taught enslavement, and that I didn't do anything to project for any of our kids more positive images leading into teaching about enslavement. So I had to make changes in my classroom to make it safe for all kids. I needed a more complete and accurate history to be taught in my classroom. And there needs to be progress working with staff to create a more inclusive environment for our students. One of the things that I really was thinking about after this presentation is if kids are skipping my class because of how they're feeling and being treated when we talk about enslavement, I need to adjust my practice. I need to change something. And in my conversations with Mr. Akufo, he talked about how in the traditional education system, the first time our Black kids hear about anybody that looks like them, it's as enslaved, and that does harm to them and to every other student in the room by framing their history as starting at that point in time. Because at least in our state, in most places, there is no teaching of any African history outside of ancient Egypt to cover any history prior to enslavement. As a result, one of the things that we started to do, and we were just searching for whatever we could find, I think I stole this from somebody in New Jersey, is we developed an African Kingdoms project. And in that project, we picked 4, and this was when I was teaching 8th grade US history, my current district. We picked 4 kingdoms: Axum, Great Zimbabwe, Mali, and Kush. And we had kids watch videos and do research to talk about all of the amazing accomplishments and cultures and developments that happened in these places, and to do that before we ever got to anything about the transatlantic slave trade or any practices that took place in the United States as it relates to that. And so I'll just share, like, these were some of the materials that we used, just some brief backgrounds and some artifacts that kids looked at and did analysis on, and then used the links and did research to try and learn more about these things that they were finding. And after we spent a couple of weeks going through and doing this research, and I've got a lot of these, so I'll skip through them pretty fast, that the kids had to pick one of the kingdoms that they found to be the most impressive and create a poster that explained why and to tell us about those kingdoms. And so these are just some of the things that our 8th graders came up with. And I ended up pretty impressed with how into it all of the kids were. So I didn't know how it was going to go, having not done this before. And then this culminated in, we had a 4-corner debate because we had 4 kingdoms. And after completing their posters, the kids went to the corner of the room that represented the kingdom that they found the most impressive. And then in their groups, they spent time talking about why the argument that they were going to make to the rest of the class about why the kingdom that they had chosen was the most impressive, and they were going to make their case to the rest of the class. And so I had classrooms full of kids making arguments in favor of why the kingdom of Mali was superior to Great Zimbabwe and vice versa, and having these deep and passionate discussions about the excellence of these kingdoms and why they were so impressive. And so it seemed to have a very positive impact, and we'll have to see going forward in our district how over time we can build on this and the effectiveness that this has with some of the impacts that it has on all of our kids in our district. I experienced this just before learning about the Institute for Common Power. And in May of 2023, I went on the Truth and Purpose Learning Tour, and it was transformative for me. To be in the place where things happened and to, as all of you know, experience history in these places and with such amazing people really was life-changing, and it motivated me to try and go further. And I felt like through the Institute was given additional tools to try and make adjustments to not only just the curriculum that I was teaching in my classroom, but talk to other staff and begin to try and incorporate more of this history on our teams. I've been involved in doing presentations to the staff and to different student groups about some of what I've learned through Common Power to try and highlight a more diverse number of voices in what students in our community are learning. And then in the fall of 2023, with the great support of our district and building administration, we piloted an ethnic studies class that fall. We've taught it twice now, and it's growing and getting better each time. And so hopefully that will continue into next year and the years beyond. And so just going to share a couple things. One of the things that we've added into our on-level U.S. history class is what we're calling a civil rights road trip. That's a station activity, and it asks students to analyze events and documents from the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, and to do that by analyzing primary source documents from the people who were there and were a part of what was going on. And so we asked students to describe and summarize the event, evaluate the success or failure of the event, and then describe why they think that event was a success or a failure. And so these were just some of the simple directions, and we had sheets for the kids to go around and fill out notes. I think my next picture is of the kids doing it. Yeah, so here's some students around one of the placards that we set out. And so on each one, they have a description of the event and then a primary source document that's related to it. And the kids go around in groups as though they're on a road trip across the United States to the places where these events have taken place. And so these are some of the placards that kids go around and are analyzing, I realized that I need to expand my Bloody Sunday and Selma information after being on the Truth and Purpose tours. But these are just a couple of the placards that the kids go around and analyze. And then once we finish up with this, we have kids create, I get 8.5 by 11 cardstock, and it says greetings from across it. And then the kids need to fill in, just like this picture that's of Washington. I use that to highlight how you could put multiple different events or places in the letters for places that our kids are familiar with. And their job is to write in the first person as though you were there when the event took place and describe the event and its context, provide specific details that they found in the primary source and additional research, and then to add pictures on the front that represent their learning along the way. And it's been really successful. The kids get really into it, and they've really enjoyed digging deeper into events. The student choice in choosing which events they look at, I think really helps out with kids finding something that they can connect with or that seemed important to them. I am not going to have enough time to go through my ethnic studies slides. So I haven't really been up to date on the chat because I couldn't figure out my screens to share and see the chat at the same time. So are there any, just trying to look at the questions, or if there were, I can, Simone, I can share the resources that I'm using. I'd be happy to. And so I hope that my community can be challenging. There's a lot of disinformation and an acceptance of things that aren't true. And people get upset when we try and teach truth. I really like using these primary source documents because if anybody has issue or a problem, this is a primary source. This is exactly what this person said about this event at the time. And we get a lot of support from our administrators, but we are one of the places where we have people saying teaching this history just makes white kids feel bad. But I hear that from adults. The kids in my classroom don't say that. The kids in my classroom are engaging with this information. They seem to be getting excited about it, and they're enjoying it. And some of the kids who maybe are spouting off campaign slogans and different stuff like that find themselves digging deep into these primary sources and stories of resistance and really finding connection with it. And so somewhere inside of those kids, I think we're making progress. And I probably have more questions than I have answers for anything about this, because I'm just trying to figure out how to do the best we can where we are. But that's some of what we've been trying to do in just a couple of projects that we've done in my district so far. Yeah, I don't know if there's any questions from anybody.
Rob, it was excellent. And I hope you get a chance to read through the full chat. There's a lot of really great feedback in there for you.
Awesome.
I think your perspective here is really critical for us. As you know, I'll just speak for myself, but as somebody at the Institute for Common Power, we attract a lot of folks who come to our learning tours who don't operate in super conservative spaces in their kind of day to day. Some do for sure, and but I think that voice is one that we don't often hear. So I think, you know, it takes courage and some vulnerability for you to be here to do that. And I just want to recognize that. I appreciate the work that you're doing. What was it for you, kind of on your own personal journey, that, you know, got you to a place of realizing you had to do something different?
I think that a lot of the kids and teachers are very much living the life that I did growing up. I had parents that took us places. My parents kind of, you know, they're very liberal, and we went to diverse places, but the world that I grew up in was not diverse, and ideas of white privilege and systemic racism were very foreign to me. It wasn't really until I got to the high school I worked with Luke at that I had to start asking myself some tough questions about why things were how they were. Had some good conversations. I remember a couple in particular with Luke about ideas of white privilege and systemic racism. And so part of what makes me want to do this work is I've had learning and growth in a lot of these areas that I see a lot of the people in the space that I'm in. They're in a similar place that I was a long time ago. But if somebody doesn't talk to them, they won't know. They won't hear those things. They won't have those understandings or be able to have conversations to even get to a point to acknowledge that white privilege exists. I've had some hard conversations with some colleagues in talking about that have really pushed back at the idea that there is such a thing as white privilege. And so part of why I want to do this is that I think of all the relationships that I've built over the years and all of the connections that I've made. And I think about how much everybody is missing out on by not opening their understanding and finding more diverse voices to listen to and experiences to have, because it enriches everybody's life. I know mine has been enriched a huge amount by moving into other spaces and hearing different voices and traditions and cultures. And so hopefully where I'm at, where there's not a lot of that, I can try and start some of those conversations.
Do you have any strategies or sources that you turn to have those conversations? Because I think a lot of educators across the country doing this work, like you are, of teaching our colleagues about teaching the truth and receiving pushback. Oftentimes, I can speak for myself, a few times I've even shut down and not known what to say when people say certain things out of pocket. So, like, what strategies do you use to have those difficult conversations?
Where I'm at right now, one of the main things I've tried to do, and this is how I start my ethnic studies class, is really talk about the idea of identity, and that we all, like me and a white male colleague who have a lot in common, when we start talking about the different identities that we have and the way that certain ones matter more at different times than others, and we find difference between the two of us that are very similar. And then I don't know if this is the right way to do it or not, but I try and build off of the idea that we have difference, but that what is different between us doesn't make me invalid or you invalid or your experience not matter. It's just different. And we can learn something from each other about how those experiences are different, and try and then use that to then layer in maybe somebody that has a different identity or different background than us, and build off of that idea that just because it's different, it doesn't make one good, one bad, one more, or one less. And so that's so far been successful where I'm at. I think also, as hard as it is sometimes to not make them feel judged if they don't know something, and try and help them through that and help them learn more or share experiences and stories. You know, for me, like thinking about the high school that I was at before, that had a very diverse population, and being the basketball coach there and some of the things that would happen when we would go to other schools and the way that my players would be treated and be accused of, stealing or whatever else. And I tell those stories to people that I've worked with now and coached with now, that my players there and my players now, there's more in common between them than not. And look at this thing. No, this thing really actually happened. And so sharing those stories has been effective, at least with a few people. And we're going to hopefully get some more conversations as we go through summer and the start of the school year.
Thank you for sharing that. I, like Luke said earlier, I hope you are able to look into the chat and see all the praise you've gotten and all the commentary. Thank you so much for sharing this. Also through the research lens, right? Like grounding a lot of what you shared with us in research before presenting what you did, right? There's intentionality behind that. And I really appreciate that perspective, like to see that through line. Because again, a lot of people who are going to combat a lot of the teachings that happen in spaces like this, they'll attack the truth, and you can't attack facts, right?
Right.
And you provided us with that, and so I really appreciate that. Before we introduce our next speaker, Luke, Ivory, did you have any other questions for Rob? All right, we're gonna get into
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
so much. All right, so I will begin the introduction for our last speaker. Mel, you can feel free to start sharing. As an educator, Mel believes that facts without compassion are not enough to transform hearts, minds, or systems. In every learning space, he strives to model empathy, critical passion, empowerment, and love, values that guide his work and reflect his belief that it is the next generation who will lead the way toward justice in this world. These are the reasons Mel teaches. By examining narratives, fostering compassion, and challenging oppressive structures such as racism and colonialism, he aims to create learning environments that build toward a more just, loving, and equitable future. Mel sees education as both a mirror and a bridge, one that reflects the realities we live in while offering paths toward collective healing and liberation. He believes that together we must remove barriers and commit to progress rooted in reconciliation, justice, and hope, and he carries this vision forward in all that he does. The floor is yours, Mel.
Sorry, just dealing with some technical stuff. Just tried to share, then it closed my Chrome. Hoping I did not lose all my stuff. Okay. I'm using a different format, Prezi, so it seems a bit complicated. I never tested it out ahead of time. Oh.
If when you share it, cut your mic out, then we can just hit the ask to unmute, because that seemed to work for earlier presentations.
Okay. I hope it even lets me share my screen. That was one of the barriers there. And I just had it all open too. Oh, boy. I'm just going to close my camera here for a second, just try to get it open first and then try to share it. If you can kind of delay here for a second, Ivory, sorry about that.
No, no worries. No worries.
Can we do a quick like panel interlude here with the three of us?
Oh, that's fun.
So I'm thinking
Getting
about
ready.
right now, my head is thinking about Simone's presentation about New York in conversation with what Rob was just talking about,
Mm.
and the ways that like the telling of like localizing the history. So I think like for a situation like Rob is in, like how do you take a project like what Simone is doing with those students in that setting as a way of localizing for relevance, right? Maybe every place has that history. Everywhere, it's everywhere, it's everywhere, and that's like the thing I took most from Simone was that this is everywhere.
Mhm.
So where is it for him, right? Like I wonder about that. Anyway,
Yeah. When she was sharing, I thought about my first visit to the African burial ground. They take you through this timeline of the history in New York City, and any, you know, thoughts you had about, enslavement didn't happen in the North, or the North was like so peaceful, it's completely shattered in that moment, because as you go through that timeline, you're seeing the harm that's been caused throughout the entire history of New York. And it really helps you understand that, kind of like also, this came up in Rob's presentation of, where does history start for people? Like,
Mhm.
it doesn't start where we think it starts. And at the very beginning, there was harm everywhere, all over. And it's a really grounding experience, because like it really pushes you to ask the difficult questions first internally and then to others. And that, I love New York, and at the same time, I have to criticize it. Um, Criticize the history and be critical of the history, and ask difficult questions, because like Simone said, this is not in our curriculum, and it's rough. It's a rough history, and it's not in there. And that has to change, right? And so how can we do that in all these spaces? And I think, this panel is kind of doing just that. Like, they're telling us all the ways we can do that.
Yeah, I think the theme is how do we make this more of a conversation of what people know to start? Because I didn't think, when Rob said, how people start to learn about Africans and African Americans, I immediately was like, man, did I learn about African kingdoms before? Dr. Scott tells that story of the scholar that, challenged her and said that there were no African kingdoms or anything like that. So just really, really trying to figure out where people are at. I saw an Instagram video that said something, or it had a video of somebody interviewing strangers and said, what's the poorest country in the world? And people kept saying Africa. It's like, Africa is not even a country, right? So the work that people are doing here is incredible. All right, Mel, we can see your screen. I'm going to hit the ask to unmute button just to make sure that we can hear you.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you. And I think in that right-hand side, if you minimize that panel, because I think that might be us, it's blocking out your screen. Yep, if you minimize that or scoot that out. Yeah, okay, you are all good to go, man. So thank you for your patience, everybody. We're going to turn this thing over to Mel and let him get started.
So I'm just starting here. So if I click this next tab, are you seeing my presenter view?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Trying to figure out here how do you not show you my presenter view.
Even when you hit that arrow for next, is that what's causing it? Now that works.
And if I'm over here, but you see all this stuff, right?
Yep.
Darn it. Okay. I just had all my notes on there. You know what? Technology, I'm gonna wing it. go from here. Sorry about
All
that,
right.
everyone. It always fails on me, but I'm happy to be here. I'm happy that you guys are able to invite me here and share these awesome stories of interruption, for resistance, for truth, and for hope. And I think that's what all these stories and these narratives of these educators, these awesome educators that I've heard from this afternoon. So mine is called Burning Houses and Moose Stew, Creating Spaces for Truth to be Taught and Lived, exploring education's foundations through the lens of colonization and systemic racism. I bring up the moose stews because when I was on the tour and a learning experience, we were in a circle sharing. People just were sharing some thoughts, and I brought up moose stew. So I'll bring that up here in a moment. You'll kind of see the relevance of it. I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement. Good day, everyone. My name is Mel Sizing. I'm a full-time educator within the Greater Saskatoon Catholic School Division and a PhD candidate at the College of Education. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered both physically and in the digital spaces that we inhabit on the traditional territories of the Cree, Saulteaux, Lakota, Lakota, Métis people. I'm grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and learn on these lands and connect with you today across these shared spaces. The process of colonization is not just a historical event, it is ongoing. As a settler, I recognize the urgent responsibility to actively support the restoration of the original spirit and intent of the treaties and to do work toward the full implementation. This relationship between settlers and Indigenous peoples is one that has, at a time, been fractured and marked by deep injustice, yet is also a relationship with the potential for repair, responsibility, and renewal. I am humbled and honored to be part of this gathering today alongside colleagues and friends as we continue the vital work of truth, reconciliation, and justice, both on the land and in the digital spaces that we share. Thank you to the Institute for Common Power for the opportunity to continually learn and to grow, to dismantle oppressive structures and institutions. So the learning path today, I start off with a little bit of a welcome and a land acknowledgement. Thank you again for the introduction. I'll frame some questions and some guiding quotes. Then we'll go look at some historical context of the education systems within Canada and the US and similarities, comparing the colonial and racial impact. And then looking at what many educators have done here this afternoon is that emancipatory education, centering truth, and then also that call to action, living the change. So just if anything, a reinforcement of the awesome work that all these teachers are doing, but also the organization. We need to collaborate all together to continually make this change. So I'm going to comment on that. Some posing questions when we think about education systems is whose knowledge counts, who benefits and who's harmed by the current system, and who has control over our educational institutions' minds. I think about the last presenter there who was talking about the systems and some of the narratives that the students were talking about and how it is harming them. To hear those things is, you know, not only in those spaces, but even we do those same type of surveys up here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in Canada, and we get a lot of the same responses. So we know there's some work to be done. So I just want to start off with this quote, the purpose of education. It's important for educators to know how deeply unjust systems affect people in their communities in unique ways, but it's also imperative to understand the intersections of injustice. Pedagogies must call out and teach students how racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, and inequity are structural, not people behaving poorly. They must criticize the systems that perpetuate injustice, such as the educational survival complex, while pushing for equitable community schools and classrooms. And if anything, all those examples of all those awesome lessons today and things that were being done in the classrooms, does exactly that. So we know we're heading in the right direction. Burning House. This is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We fought hard and long for integration, as I believe we should have, and I know that we will win. But I've come to believe that we're integrating into a burning house. I'm afraid that America may be losing what moral vision she may have had. I'm afraid that even as we integrate, we are walking into a space that does not understand that this nation needs to be deeply concerned with the plight of the poor and disenfranchised. Until we commit ourselves to ensuring that the underclass is given justice and opportunity, we will continue to perpetrate the anger and violence that tears at the soul of this nation. And I want to juxtapose that with this quote here, Moose Stew. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s fear of integrating into a burning house speaks to the danger of entering systems that remain fundamentally unjust. Similarly, Elder Stan Wilson's teaching warns that simply adding Indigenous perspectives to mainstream education, like rabbit meat to moose stew, doesn't change the essence of what's being served. Both teachings challenge the idea that reform through inclusion is enough, whether it's racial integration or curricular diversity. When the core structure remains unchanged, colonial, racist, or Eurocentric, it risks more harm than good. Instead, as Wilson suggests, we must create entirely new spaces, rabbit stew on its own terms, where Indigenous knowledges and also knowledges from other groups is not an add-on, but the foundation. So a little bit of historical context. I'm going to start off with Canada and then kind of talk about some similarities in the United States and then kind of frame it all together. Kind of talking about these systems that probably not only our two nations here on Turtle Island, but if you look globally, the similarities. So in Canada, the Canadian residential schools, they were government supported religious institutions designed to assimilate Indigenous children. Thousands were forcibly removed from their families, leading to cultural disconnection and trauma, as these schools inflicted systemic abuse and neglect while erasing Indigenous identities. And when you think about this idea of colonization and what we have here on North America, you know, for other colonies, as they were building their empires, they would extract resources. Not only did, you know, for our two countries, were the resources extract, they stayed. So colonists leaving a region or being pushed off of it still leaves a legacy that Indigenous people must endure. Canada, like many other nations, is a settler colonial state, meaning colonial settlers arrived without leaving, and with proclaimed and implied aims to wipe out the local people, settler colonialism is a system and not an event, writes Patrick Wolf. And to build off that, settler colonialism capital always has depended on the appropriation of land and labor of dispossessed people. Canada has turned away from this discussion so that there is no compromise to the ongoing accumulation of wealth, privilege, and access and control. The colonial settler system cannot continue without access to land. So if we think of our two nations, if the land wasn't underneath our feet and these colonial systems weren't there, could they have a colonial system without the land? So they have to have this land. An example here of, you know, what has happened to the land from the government of Canada. So as the colonial state was developed, what eventually happened is that 99.8% of Canadian land is now owned by the government, while Indigenous people and reserves got designated 0.2%, which is to me ridiculous. And we're talking about treaty, we're talking about sharing resources equally. That is a number. It's right there. This fact is not being shared equally. And one of the architects, John A. Macdonald, he was, you know, very forceful on his viewpoints about how to create Canada. So what he quoted was, when the school is on the reserve, the child lives with its parents, who are the savages. He is surrounded by savages, and through he may learn to read and write. His habits and training and mode of thought are Indian. He is simply a savage who can read and write. It has been strongly pressed on myself as the head of the department that the Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from the parental influence. And the only way to do that would be put them into central training industrial schools where they will acquire the habits and modes of thought of white men. So this architect of genocide, you know, using education as that tool. And when you resisted, I know in my province here in Canada, we had the largest mass hanging in Canadian history, which took place at Fort Battleford on November 27th, 1885, where 8 Indigenous leaders were executed. So anyone that visited at the time as Canada was being developed was met with violence. And we think this commonality, so similarity with the Indian boarding schools in the US operated under the guise of education, but aimed at eradicating Indigenous cultures. These institutions enforce strict military-like discipline, leading to long-lasting psychological impacts and the loss of cultural heritage among Native American communities. Again, very similar, almost eerie time frame of the execution of the 38 Dakota men in Mankato, Minnesota. This event, at the time largest single mass execution in American history occurred after the U.S. Dakota War in 1862. So this idea of cultural genocide to get access to the land was manifested through policies aimed at dismantling indigenous ways of life. These policies have created a lasting legacy of trauma amongst indigenous populations. The impact of trauma is evident in various aspects of life, including education and community health. Indigenous identity has also been profoundly affected by these historical actions, and addressing their legacy is crucial for healing and empowerment of indigenous communities. And then I wanted to, transition to, here's a quote from John Wayne, and I won't read it out loud, but you can kind of see some of his commentary there, talking about Black and brown bodies and his attitude towards it. And, when you have that attitude, how does it affect these systems of education, government, and all these other areas where it can really outside and marginalize groups? So school segregation, the post-Civil War era, following the Civil War, the Southern United States enacted laws to enforce Black and white student population in public schools, aiming to uphold white supremacy and social control. And a lot of this was reinforced in the tour that I got to go on to that was so enriching. I know I talk a lot about the Canadian narrative. That's what I was thinking of when I was on these tours, is the similarities. This similarity of policy, how these policies are put in place. That's why it's so systemic. And the Plessy versus Ferguson court case, they're separate but equal, but not really. The resource disparities in these schools as compared to the white counterparts. And again, the psychological and the traumatic effects that happen daily. It's like, even thinking about the last speaker, it's still happening. It's ongoing. We have not changed the system yet. But if we were to change the system, what would that look like? So here is a little bit of a summary of the comparative impact of racialized and settler education systems, looking at, for where I'm from, where I stand, the Canadian residential schools, and then looking at the American Indian boarding schools, then American segregated schools, as compared to white settler education. And for the most part, these white settler education schools are, access to local well-funded public schools, English instruction aligned with dominant narratives, trained for civic participation and leadership, enabled access to land, loans, and political power, maintain white cultural dominance and economic growth. So I think of, the schools that we teach at. What are they reinforcing? And again, probably at the end of this, you'll probably have more questions. And I always have continued questions. So what are we going to do about it? What are these steps forward? So just listening to the last speaker and then these interruptions from the previous speakers of the awesome work that they're doing, just acknowledging the framework. So colonial education frameworks, both Canada and US implemented education systems designated to assimilate Indigenous peoples, prioritizing Eurocentric curricula, and this marginalization enforced a hierarchical structure that alienated Indigenous knowledge and culture, leading to cultural dislocation and loss. So I think about all the different strategies that we're using in our Canadian schools from my own research. And one of my favorite authors, Steve Tuck and Yang in 2012, is that we say these buzzwords, but often are just a metaphor. There is not much change going on in our current education institutions. And I know to you individuals in the US that it's even more challenging. There is an attack on education systems and critical thought. The myth of a neutral curriculum, it is never neutral. It definitely holds an agenda. So once we realize that and are kind of prepared to disrupt that a little bit, I think that's really important to keep in mind. And where I usually start off with, and I could hear resonating in the last speaker, this decolonizing of self, looking first in the middle there at yourself. What are these things around us? And then thinking about our communities and families, and then thinking about that larger nation state. So confronting these colonial imbalances, racism and Eurocentric superiority cause becoming unhappy with the past, and unlearning and relearning Canadian truths are necessary. And that would go for American truth as well. It's just that framework. Now we just are applying it to our different locations of where we're at. And if we start off with ourselves, and like how the other individual was talking about, I'm going to start with my staff, I'm going to start with my community, start with my families, and this will slowly ripple out. All we got to do is start to plant these seeds. So epistemicide refers to the systemic suppression of Indigenous and marginalized knowledge systems within educational frameworks. This silencing diminishes the richness of educational discourse and perpetuates a Eurocentric narrative, erasing diverse histories and contributions. And what I loved about some of the presentations today is bringing those stories out. And those stories are important. We need to center those stories and then bring those other ones, like the more traditional system, to these stories, because these stories that empower, that liberate these communities. And it's important to talk about the system that has impressed these communities for such long periods of time. So there's kind of three modes of education, like buzzwords that we use that I found in my research looking at the literature. One is inclusion, where we, if we include, I'm just gonna go to my notes because I don't know why it's not working. So you're gonna see my notes, what I have here. So I'm just going to look at, so Indigenous inclusion aims to expand the number of Indigenous students, teachers, and staff in Canadian educational institutions while improving Indigenous student spaces, resource, and support. Not a bad thing in and all of itself, but is it limited? Does it only allow for certain things, or does it maintain a certain system? The second one, we'll be looking at reconciliation education. We use that word here because of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission here in Canada. So again, bringing in knowledges, voices, critiques, researchers, students, resources, and spaces into university discourses help integrate reconciliation and strategic goals. It increases partnerships, Indigenous advisory, and reconciliation committees. But again, thinking critically, does reconciliation, is it a settler move to innocence? Does it, if we do these things, has it totally disrupted the system? That absolves settler culture from benefiting from the erasure, dispossession, and assimilation of Indigenous peoples while ignoring colonial brutality, land theft, destruction of land, water, air, and so on. So is it enough? And the one that I lean towards, and where we've seen a lot of the amazing work happen throughout history, is that radical shift, that revolutionary education. So decolonial education envisions a radical shift in the academy to reorient knowledge production based on a power balance between Indigenous peoples and Canadians, a shift in academy to address Indigenous knowledges from its roots, teaching styles, orientations, and learning processes, and an integration of Western academy theories and approaches with Indigenous knowledge, resulting in something novel and dynamic. So we reframe it. So we go around these stories and then bring these theories and learning processes from the Western academy and Eurocentric. Could we create something totally new? I'll go back. So steps to decolonization. For me, and that journey that I took in the US and continue to take here in Canada, it's that rediscovering. And often what I'll find in myself is that I go from rediscovering, mourning, healing, and dreaming. They almost work simultaneously, because I will get sad and I find moments of healing, like listening to the group that we are today, and then dream, what can we do next? And then we dedicate. And then much like this organization, we bring it to action. So I'll just bring it back here. Emancipatory approaches. I've gotten my hands slapped a few times. I'm kind of living and learning, so bringing my students to protest probably wasn't the best thing. So I did that a couple of times. So a little bit of media coverage, maybe not in the most positive light, but at that time, that's where I was at. It's like, I've got to do it. And the students were researching with me. So that was looking at Standing Rock, what was happening with the pipelines. And this one was here looking at a practice at police carding in our city. So you can see myself and a few of them, my students. And we just did a peaceful protest. All we did was when the police chief and the mayor talked, we just stood up and we turned our backs. Says, we're not listening to you if you're not willing to listen to us. So reinforcing these truth-telling engages learners in addressing historical injustices and current inequities. This approach fosters critical thinking and creates a safe place for dialogue, enabling students to connect with their personal experiences on broader societal issues. And that's exactly what all these educators are doing. We have to tell the truth. And then living that truth in the classroom. This practice empowers students to become our co-creators of knowledge, enriching the classroom environment and enhancing engagement. So one academic way of looking at things for a method is emancipatory pedagogy, youth participatory action research. So if you look at Lawrence Tan and his work, what he's done in the US there, and I also think he's created a brand new school, you might want to check what he's been doing, but really centers around what all somebody commented, there's a thread of commonality in all our presentations. So why I like YPAR is that it gets away from, some of the things that stood out for me is the most educated in urban settings revert to a banking model which dehumanizes urban students. So away from this idea that all we have to do is just get content in and do nothing with it. I like what people are doing with the information that they're gathering is that you have to bring it to action. So this YPAR process, I investigated it and I looked at it for my PhD research, and it is something that has been validated. So it's like defining a research question with your students or community, or all in collaboration, and then have your students look at a survey-related literature, develop a research design, collect and analyze the data, write a group report, and make a public presentation. So what I love about this process, it encourages not only our students, myself as an educator, but also the community, because often you're working in collaboration. No one's distanced, no one's like othered, everyone's included. And why it works, identifies the community as an asset, counters injustice, gives students agency to cause change, addresses culturally relevant problems, uses collective action, reinforces curricular literacy goals, repositions students as actors, sociologists, researchers, and contributors to social change, enables students to maintain their identity as youth, and engages students and urban students as public intellectuals and civic contributors. And I love that empowerment piece for our students. You are a sociologist, you are, an anthropologist, you are a researcher, you are valid, you matter. So I'm just going to show a video. So our students were studying residential schools, and they presented this at a conference at the university, but they did it in a unique way of creating lyrics to a song, making a video out of it, and they highlighted all the research along with technical paper writing with this other way of sharing information. So I'll share this with you. Hopefully it works.
2 Indigenous people were shot and killed by police in 8 days.
In all, RCMP took 6 people into custody.
There's a lot of work to be done in this country.
Police set up their own blockade.
We are peaceful people. What is your answer?
Our name is Eco Justice, and we have something to say. Residential schools were real. No one likes it that way. This is for the average person. You need to change your ways. We took the air, we cut the hair. This injustice can't stay. We have to start to care, for this treaty wasn't fair. We took that culture like some vultures. That's more than a pioneer. That's more than a mistake. It's time we made a change. We took that clothes, put them in rows, and now we're all astray. This knowledge isn't new, but trust that it is true. Just because you didn't do it doesn't mean it isn't cruel, and it is not okay. It's time to educate. People still live with their pain every day. It's time we stand together, even if it's in the rain. The scars are not their memoirs, and they are not their pain. We caused the genocide, and still we stand with pride. We need to speak up and bring truth to our lives. Eco, open your eyes, be a bridge for the people so the people can rise. Eco, it's all worth our time to be a bridge for the people who are trying to survive. Eco, we're here learning the why to be a bridge for the people so the people can climb. Eco, can you catch the vibe? We're here reaching the hearts of the
So that was our students taking theory to action, representing it in a way that they were comfortable with. So they had that component of creating something that they want to do, is create a song and a video, but also they also had to write out and be very technical. So very holistic and very full, a very thick way of representing the needs of the community and what was happening during that time. So I come back to this picture of a burning house and moose stew, and to think about the institutions that we work in and what we're reinforcing and what we're challenging. I think we're in the space now that we can dream to action, to create something brand new, listening to the different lessons that were shared and experiences. I know we can create those pockets and hopefully they have more of them as we move forward. I'm just going to read this last part as I end. So thank you to the institution for Common Power and the opportunity to share the space and vision with you today. Your commitment to equity, justice, and collective empowerment resonates deeply with the message we've explored, that education must be more than inclusion, it must be transformation. As we reflect on the legacies of segregated, reserved, and residential schools and the ongoing impact of systemic oppression in education, we are reminded that now is the time to redefine what learning truly means. You're part of a movement rooted in dreaming boldly, dedicating deeply, and acting courageously. Let us continue building spaces where truth is not just spoken but lived, where the stew is no longer moose with rabbit meat, but a nourishing liberatory meal crafted together from the ground up. Thank you for your work, your vision, and your power. Peace and love.
Mel, so Mel was on the September 2024 trip and we talked about moose stew because I'd never heard the phrase, and you just turned that into a super powerful lecture. I'm super grateful. I don't know if Luke or Carmen maybe had a question, or if we wanted to be respectful of time and maybe start to close out. So
I just had a quick comment. I appreciate you naming that, you can't really have a neutral curriculum. Education is very political, and we all these countries, we have to stop lying to ourselves and saying that it's neutral, right? We have to be agitators, and I appreciate you sharing how you are an agitator in the best way, and you're a supporter of your students, and they're very lucky to have you.
Thanks. Is there any questions? I haven't checked the chat.
I see no questions in the chat, just a lot of praise. So definitely take a second to take that in. I guess we can start to close out since we have just a couple minutes left. Luke, do you still have the slides up? Maybe we can share the upcoming events that we have. So we have a couple of events. So we definitely recommend that you all go on to our website for the Institute for Common Power and look at our democracy curriculum. If you follow that through, you'll see all the events that we'll have for the year. These are 2 upcoming events that you could register for. And we have the links in the chat right now. There is a series June 9th, 16th, and 23rd from Selma to Stonewall. And we also have the Freedom School Saturday. That's going to be an event Saturday, June 28th on those times. There is an in-person portion if you're in Selma, but it's a virtual event on Zoom. So we definitely recommend that you register. I like to say that even if you can't make it the day of, we do email out the recording if you register for the event. So, share it with your networks. You're going to see a lot more powerful work as long as you stick with the Institute. Anything else you guys want to add before we close out? It is 9 o'clock in New York.
No, that was it. Special thanks to our presenters tonight. Really appreciate you taking some time to be with us. 5 incredible educators sharing their wisdom with us. We really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We hope to see you all at the next events. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.